It is election season, and we have a number of local races all throughout eastern Idaho. In the city of Idaho Falls, there are races for mayor and city council. Jim Francis is joining me via Zoom from his home in Idaho Falls. He is seeking re-election for a third term for seat 4. He has one challenger for this seat, but this will be his third term if he's reelected. Jim, thank you so much for taking some time with me today.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me
I think
about
we
you.
should emphasize the point right away that although they're labeled as separate seats, all 3 seats that are up for election are citywide. So everybody in the city who's a qualified voter can vote.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, some
So
people do
people get
have some
confused.
confusion
Yeah.
there.
They get
It's it
confused because they think we're divided by districts, but we are not. It's a citywide election
it's
for all
represented
3 seats.
citywide.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jim, why have you decided to seek re-election?
Interestingly, I think it has to do with the reason I decided to run in the first place 8 years ago. And here's some reasons. It's kind of my philosophy of what I'm up to. But I started out 8 years ago and said I was inspired by Kate Curley. And the thing that Kate Curley said, and I follow as best I can, is essentially we have to plan now, we have to act now for the future. In other words, there's no such thing as status quo. We can't freeze Idaho Falls and say that's all we're going to be. It doesn't work. That's actually downhill. So we always have to think about what we do now being part of what we make for the future. And I've had that for 8 years and thinking in those terms. And second thing, why I decided to run for a third term and why I decided to run in the first place has to do with my philosophy, if you will. I started my career in Idaho Falls was as an educator, and actually, I still identify myself as a teacher of history. Even though I retired in 2011, I still think of myself that's where I did my career. So, with that in mind, what I did is I went from theory, teaching about ideas about democracy, the ideas about governing people, and letting the students make up their mind about what they thought democracy was, particularly what they thought the essence of democracy was. Now I've gone from the theory of those ideas to the actual practice. There's several things that will be part of going forward, and some of the groundwork's already been laid in the last 8 years. But one, it's time for the community to figure out how to put together a full-scale community center that brings all kinds of generations, all kinds of people from the community together to interact with one another. I picture the day in this community center when the grandmother is taking the grandchild down the lazy river together and they're having a great time together. Intergenerational. There's all kinds of things that happen in these up-to-date community centers that do bring people together in a variety of ways. That's something. I don't make political promises because you can't pull everything together and know I'm going to get you this. But I'd say that's something I'm working toward in the next 8 years. Second, 21st century policing, the groundwork is already laid. If you think about the police complex that was built in the last few years, and by the way, I was at the leading edge of figuring out how to finance that complex without increasing taxes on the taxpayers of Idaho Falls because we didn't bond for it and taxpayers are not paying interest on something on an expensive bond. Instead, we found out how to finance it through general fund money that was already there. And that's kind of tricky to understand. But if you think about if you have a large one-time project in a particular year, which we did, then the next year that one-time money is built into the budget and can be used for an ongoing cost, such as paying the certificate of participation to pay for the police complex. But the police complex is more than a building. It opens doors for all kinds of new and innovative ways for the police to operate. And it's the kind of thing that, all right, so we're doing this, we're laying the groundwork for the rest of the century. And it's kind of like back to Kate Curley. What she did planting trees, cleaning up the city, cleaning up the streets, getting the cows to stop eating the trees and turning over the garbage. Those are the kinds of things that were at the beginning of the century and in the 1890s. Because she did some of that, it's there for us now. She helped to establish a library. Now we have a tremendous city library. So that's how you lay groundwork in ways you don't know what all the consequences are going to be, but you do know you're doing something that builds a future. In the last 8 years, we have finished now the project of establishing fiber throughout the entire city. Everybody in the city can have access to internet fiber, high-speed internet.
So,
That's, again, we're going forward. Keep going.
so Jim, a lot of the people running for city council have cited the housing affordability as like their number one issue. They're concerned about housing prices and they're concerned about the city's plan. Some of them are critical of the plan that the city council came up with for future growth, specifically as it relates to housing. They're concerned about the multi-use development housing versus single home housing. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. First of all, it is a national trend and it's called the demand for missing middle, but that doesn't help people really understand what it is. Idaho Falls, based on national demand and demand for people coming to this city, was or is for housing options. Yes, single family detached dwellings, there's a demand for that. It's being built all over. At the same time, there's a demand for townhomes. There's a demand for apartments. Some people don't want to spend it, or they can't afford right now to start out by buying a single family home because the price is honestly too high. So what has happened? Not because the city came out and said, this is what you have to do, developers. Mm-mm. The city enabled developers who wanted to do it to build these multifamily, well, just call it the housing options. There's so many advantages to what they have decided to do. First of all, think about the parcels of land these are being built on. 8 years ago, there were parcels of land all throughout the city that were still in the county, completely surrounded by the city, which means that whoever owned that property benefited from the city services, but they didn't pay a penny in city tax. So over the period of my early years on council, the council, with the help of the Community Development Services Department, began to annex all of those very legally and very according to state statute. But we began to annex what we call infill. The thing about infill is it's often a peculiar piece of property. So in terms of shape or just where it's located. So if I take an example, would be the property that's near Home Depot. I think it's called the Jenny Lee development, or Wasatch is doing the development. If you can think of where I am, 25th near Community Park. The developer purchased that land on the basis that the corporation believed they could make it pencil out by building multifamily dwellings, as you could see that they're putting together in a variety of, like, there's 55 and older area, etc. But at the same time, they knew that they wanted to develop commercial on that property too. So we have the zone that allows them to do it. To try to work that piece of property into single family homes, I think they decided there was no way that they could make the money out of it. So I'm a believer in capitalism, and that is developers are the ones who know what the demand is, how they can make money. It's the city's responsibility to make sure those are built to a high standard and they meet the zoning requirements. And for us to think in terms of how do we make sure there's enough options in the city, particularly so anybody who works in this city should be able to live in this city, which means we should, as a council, and we are, working on ways to help affordable housing be built, and call it workforce housing or whatever you label you want to give it, but it's housing that developers have found they can build it with support of grants and keep the rents lower. So we have done that on two projects. Most famous, probably well known, and the biggest, I think, is the Black Feather project near Bush School, and that's affordable housing project. The city did not have to give much money to it, but we did give a little bit of money so that they could apply for big grants from the federal government, which they got, and then they built it. And now they're able to rent at a lower level than the rest of the market, which helps people who work here have a place they can live in the city. Additionally, because again, I'm a capitalist on this, and I don't want council to tell a developer exactly what they must do in terms of building. But I will say that because of my faith in capitalism, the only way we're going to drive down housing prices and rental prices, particularly for apartments, is when we have the market meeting the demand. And so, because there's a big demand, which is good, Idaho Falls is an attractive place. People want to come here and live. So it's now a place that people can come and live in a much more variety of homes, places to live. They can have choices. They didn't have that before. Also, all these infill things, as I was saying, where we annex the county parcels, etc., what's come out of that is this kind of creative building and mix of commercial and housing. But it has really allowed people to choose where they want to live, and it's made efficient use of land, or more efficient use of land. And why is that important? Because what's the alternative? To keep moving south into fertile farmland and eat up farmland and make it into another subdivision after another subdivision after another subdivision after another subdivision. And pretty soon you go, wait a minute. We've just made farming more expensive, more difficult, and we've eaten up some of this prime land in what's called urban sprawl. And what does urban sprawl create that people are worried about? Traffic. So think about it. Back to that development near Home Depot. Those people will be able to walk to a grocery store, a first-class grocery store. They'll be able to walk to a hardware store. So saying that just because you build a development with multifamily housing in it in the city does not mean automatically there'll be more traffic than if you build it all south of town or west of town or north of town, where people have to get in their cars to get anywhere. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, tell me and I'll rework it.
Another issue I wanted to address with you, a lot of the candidates I've spoken with, there's a perception among some of these candidates that city council does not, they're not accessible to the public. And if by chance a member of the public is able to talk to a city council member, the perception seems to be that they don't care or that they're rude. You know, they don't really aren't really implementing things that the public voted for. Um, do you have any response to that particular
Yeah, I made
concern?
a promise when I took office that I would respond to every email. And only in 2 incidents did we get so many emails. One of them shut the whole system down that I couldn't answer everybody. But when people bring a complaint to me, I respond. And I very deliberately said, I am not going to say, thank you for your message. Sincerely, Jim. I said, you have to give me some time to go to the staff, to the directors, and get background information on what your concern is. And then I'll get back to you. And I have tried to do that with all of the emails that I've gotten. I believe government, particularly at the local level, has to be responsive. Sometimes I think we get to the point that someone says, I wanted something to change, and it didn't change. Like this, it couldn't be that way. It's not that they weren't listened to. They were listened to. But when you dig into the solution to the problem, and back to my triangle of trying to balance the liberty, I haven't said it yet, but one of the reasons I want to run is I like planning, I like policy making, and I like problem solving. There's 3 parts of being on city council, and answering emails is problem solving.
You are one of the few incumbents in this city council race. You and one other candidate, Jim Freeman,
Correct.
who's on another seat. But you guys are the sole incumbents in this race. Many of the candidates are new to politics. This is their first time running for office. What what would you say to voters? Why do they need an experienced person on the city council as opposed to a fresh face? Why should people vote for you over some of these new candidates?
This is a case where experience will be helpful, I believe, because we're on the cusp of figuring some things out. I call it the unfinished business, where we're trying to institutionalize a much more open and a much more clear way of approaching the budget every year so that people can access it. Now people can go on the city website and they can look at exactly how the budget is put together and what the numbers are for every department. That wasn't there 8 years ago at all. But we have more to go to make all of our planning and policy really clear to people.
Okay. So for people watching, just a reminder that Election Day is coming up November 4th, and Jim Francis is one of 2 candidates running for seat 4. Um, Jim, appreciate you taking some time and explaining your stance on some of these things. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
Yeah, let me come back to this idea of the growth and change in the city. I think that this is where 8 years of experience will help making decisions that will make the next step in dealing with growth more nimble, more smooth, helping developers better than we were when it was all crunch time, and improving that so that growth pays for itself, for example. We are just at the point that these things need to be institutionalized to the point that the next generation, when I'm not there and others aren't there with that experience, then it will be easier on the next group.